Welcome to the first game of the Bona Cup. We are kicking things off with quite an interesting matchup. Two pretty modern teams. A lot of the Bona Cup, you'll see a lot of the older teams. Not this one. We got two very familiar teams, very good in their own rights. A regular season champion in 2016 and an Atlantic 10 championship team in 2012. And we're lucky enough to have one of the members of the 2011 2012 Bona team. He was there for that run in Atlantic City and 2 years following. We have Danny Farrell here with us. It's good to have you on, man. It's good to kick things off with someone who's familiar with these teams. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into the some of the stories that go into that amazing weekend in Atlantic City.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on here. I love what you guys have been doing here, and as much as we can do to promote Bonaventure as a whole, I think is only going to be a great benefit for the university as well. So, a great job.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I haven't seen uh, any other programs do anything like this. Part of the reason is because we have so much free time now. We can actually embark on crazy projects like this, and give people something to do in the summer where there's no sports. But uh, going back to that 2011 2012 year, do you have any good stories about that? Because it was such an amazing run. There's a lot of ups and downs that year that we'll get into, but such a great run, a great 3 days. One of the best weekends of my life. From a fan's perspective, I was there from Thursday night all the way until Monday morning. But
Yep.
from the players' perspective, being in the locker room with Schmidt and Nicholson and that entire
Mhm.
great roster, what are some of the memories that you have?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Atlantic City, those few days were probably some of the best times of my life as well. I mean, you said you were there from Thursday till Monday, and I think one of the coolest things about it was seeing all the fans because there was a small group that came down on Thursday, and then we won, and then on Friday you saw a few more people coming, and then the whole busload started coming on Saturday and Sunday, and then we basically just took over Atlantic City, which was awesome as a Bonnet Nation. I remember seeing videos of casinos closing down because we were jumping on the tables and things, and love the passion that the Bonnies fans always brought to all the games, and it really showed how much they care about basketball in Olean. So that was probably the first thing that stands out about AC. Um, Being in the locker room during that time was amazing. I mean, we all had one goal in mind, and that was to win the A10 championship. And we thought we had a great opportunity to do it, especially with the league's best player in Andrew Nicholson. You always have a chance.
Yeah.
Um, so that was great. There is one story that does come to mind. During spring break, we were the only people up there other than I think the women's basketball team and maybe the swim team, but we were just walking the campus. It was me, Demetrius, and Matt Wright, and we were heading over to Dunkin' Donuts for breakfast, and we were just talking, and we got to talking and said, hey, let's make a little bet that if we win the A10s, I'll shave my head, go bald. So fast forward a few weeks later, we get to the Atlantic 10 championship, and we end up winning. And I'm sitting there on the court celebrating with everybody, getting our T-shirts. And Mike Davenport comes up to me and he's like, "Hey man, you remember what you said, right?" And I was like, "No, what's that?" He's like, "You got to go bald." So fast forward to when we went to Nashville a couple weeks after, Demetrius and I and the whole team got into one of the hotel rooms, and we shaved our heads for the Florida State game. So that's why we were bald for that game.
It's funny you mentioned that because when I was creating the players for this, I was going back and looking at, like, I wanted their look to be what they looked like that season, and part of that
Hmm.
was the hairstyles, obviously.
Yeah,
So I was looking at Conger when I was making it, and
yeah,
like he had his regular hair, and then
yep,
I was looking at pictures from the Florida State game, and I was like, why did he shave his head? Like, should I make him bald in this game? I had no
yeah.
idea. So that's a pretty funny story.
Yeah, it was
Um,
funny. None of the coaches really knew about it when it was going on, and then we got to breakfast the next morning, the day of the Florida State game, and they were just like, "What the hell?"
That is great. Yeah, Atlantic City
Yeah.
too, like you mentioned, all the fans going wild. It was more, I don't know if it was because I was still in school, like I was in grad school, but it
Mhm.
seemed like it was such a free for all in Atlantic City, where now things are a little bit more strict, especially in Washington D.C. I don't know if you've been to any tournaments since, but just it
Mhm.
was such a great atmosphere, and we were as a fan base certainly ready to party for our first ever A10 tournament. But going into that, we kind of had going into the season. Let's start there. We thought we were good enough, obviously, to get an at-large bid, but some
Mhm.
things happened throughout the season where going into Atlantic City, we pretty much had to win the tournament to get into the NCAA tournament. Um, you remember Marquise tearing his Achilles, I think the first minute of the season. I went to Cleveland to watch us lose a tough, tough game to Cleveland State. And I remember the Arkansas State game too, I think it was. Very low lows and high highs that year. Do you remember going through, November, Keith getting injured and Mike Davenport getting injured and some of those losses? Like, can you take us into the locker room for those moments too, like the low points of that season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those were two huge blows for us, losing two key players and veteran players like Marquise and Mike. Marquise the first game of the year, and then Mike a little bit after, missing basically the entire season as well. Really forced a lot of other people to step up in their absence. I think the way that like Jordan and Yusu as freshmen stepped up
Hmm.
to fill in, the way that Matt stepped up and worked his way, and then Eric and Charlon and Chris, everybody really just had to take one step above them and than where they were really at that point. And basically, if you were a freshman, you needed to become a sophomore at that point. If you were a sophomore, you needed to become a junior, and you needed to do it quickly because we didn't have any other options.
Yeah.
So you always knew the consistency was going to be there with Andrew. He'll give you his 20 and 10 a night, but it was who's the next guy up that's going to help him because he can't do it by himself. And I think the way that it worked out, like going through that adversity and then going to the end of the year with basically one starting lineup, and then Matt Wright coming out to coach right before the Rhode Island game at the end of the year saying, hey, I think it's probably better off if I come off the bench
Hmm.
and give a little bit of a spark that way. That really changed the whole last 6, 7 games of the year. I think we won on a 4 or 5 game winning streak after we made that the lineup change,
Hmm.
and ultimately got us to that top four seed is what we were looking for to begin the regular season, and unfortunately dropped the ball the last game versus LaSalle, but took care of business in that double overtime thriller against St. Joe's, and that game was probably one of the best regular season games I've ever been a part of.
That's actually what my next question was going to be, because I remember I was actually right behind the bench for that
Hmm.
game. Such a thrilling game, and that's what
Crazy,
got us
crazy.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it got us that, and the students weren't even there for that game. I don't think, were they?
No, that was during a spring break game as well, I
Yeah,
believe too. So
and
yeah, it was
I
during that week we were
remember.
making that bet.
Yeah, okay. I
Uh,
remember a ridiculous foul call on Charlon that I thought was going to
yeah,
cost us the game.
yeah,
Just
right at the
another,
end there, right?
yeah, within that game, so many highs and lows, but then ultimately Andrew just, developing a 3-point shot that year and
Yep.
hitting big threes, which seemed like they were right in front of me. So um, that was just another one of the best games I've ever seen. I
Oh
put
yeah.
that right up there with that recent triple overtime game against Davidson
Hmm.
from 2018. But are there any other, great games, great moments that you remember, because you were there for 3 years? What
Hmm.
sticks out to you up there with the St. Joe's game in Atlantic City?
Yep. I mean, obviously the Xavier game. That was probably one of the. I had to be the best game that we were a part of. Just winning that.
Yeah.
The way that we held that offensive powerhouse to just 56 points was just a testament to how hard we worked throughout the whole year. And Coach Schmidt always emphasized defending, rebounding, and taking care of the ball. And
Yeah,
if you do those things, you're going to win most of the time. And we did that for that Xavier game, and obviously won that championship. So that was a lot of fun. One other game that does stick out is a year later with Jordan Gathers in that St. Louis game that we had in the game winner that he hit.
absolutely.
There's nothing better than a game winner, and and getting out there. And unfortunately, the next game against St. Joe's that year was a tough one for us. They were a pretty good team, but that was probably another game that stuck out as one of those memorable games, other than the Xavier and St. Joe's games.
Yeah, you were part of some great games and great teams. And talking about that defense that they had in 2012, the big, strong front court with Cook and Nicholson, and then
Mm-hmm.
perimeter defenders, like Charlon. So I guess to end this, one of my last questions would be, because we're doing this simulation to show all these teams together, how do you think that team compares to some of the teams that we've seen since? Because
Yeah.
that really brought us all the way back from the Solomon era, and really
Mm-hmm.
I think it put us on the map again as a national program, and it did so much for the school. But how does that team compare? Like, how you said we shut down a high powered Xavier offense, but how do you think they would match up with some of the high powered offenses we've seen with Jalen Adams and Matt Mobley and Posey?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm a little biased just being a part of the 2012
Of
team,
course,
so I
yeah.
think I think I'd say we could take any of those teams. But I think a very intriguing matchup, say we did like a 7 game series, would be with the other NCAA team, the 2018 team. They had so much offensive power, and they gelled well together that I think it'd be a great test for the 2012 team. But ultimately, with having Nicholson on our team, I think that we'd have a slight edge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't know if they had a true five that could match up
Yeah,
with them, but that's kind of why I wanted to do this and why we're doing what we're doing. We're about to find
yeah,
out. Um, 2012, your team with Andrew Nicholson, Demetrius Conger, Kloof, Wright, Cook, all those guys up against, and then Eric Mosley, who was another one of my favorite
yeah,
players.
yeah. They had a 40-point game that year.
Yeah, an exciting player to watch. So they'll be going up against 2016, another one of all of our favorite teams. These teams are only 4 years apart, but they had such huge turnover. There aren't any players that are playing on both of these teams. It should be a very exciting game to watch. Some interesting matchups. Kloof versus Adams. We want to see how that's going to go. And then, of course, Posley will be out there. Dion Wright, Conger, Nicholson. So many great players will be out there. And let's see how this turns out, man. It's been good to have you on to get some insight. If you have anything else that you want to leave us with before we head off to the game, the stage is yours. Otherwise, maybe we can get you on again some other time and talk a little bit more in depth about that season, because it was such a great storied season.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you having me on here. I think the only thing I'd leave with is for the Bona fans out there. Let's keep getting fans for our TBT team, and hopefully we can see the brown and white on the court again here soon.
Absolutely, that would be great. See a lot of these guys get to play together in real
Yeah.
life, which we never got to see. Um,
Yeah.
but Danny Farrell, part of the 2012 Atlantic 10 championship team. It was great having you on, and let's get this started.
Yeah, really appreciate it, and let's have some fun.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.